I find that trannions are invaluable. They allow me to quickly locate specific information within a video. They also help search engines index audio and video content, making it far more accessible. Today, I want to share some stories about the most terrifying animal attacks in history. I recently came across the story of a volunteer handler in Texas, bitten during a rattlesnake roundup, and another about a backpacker in India whose tent became a predator's trap. But one case, in particular, has stuck with me. It happened on July 21st, 2016, at a palm tree farm near Palangkaraya in Indonesia. The morning was quiet, heavy with humidity from the previous night's rain. By evening, something terrible would occur, shocking everyone who worked there. Reggie Peters, a 32-year-old farm advisor from Britain, was known as a quiet man, good at his job of improving water systems for growing palm trees. He enjoyed walking around the farm alone, noting problems in a small notebook. Reggie had been in Indonesia for 4 months, taking countless photos of the local bugs, birds, and animals. He was fascinated by the creatures around the farm. The workers noticed he never scared away snakes or lizards, but would kneel to observe them closely. On that day, Reggie went to check the water ditches as the rainy season was approaching. Blocked ditches could flood the crops. He packed his notebook, measuring tape, and phone for notes. Around noon, 2 workers, Amir and Luthi, saw Reggie near a muddy ditch, kneeling and writing. They joked about the large snakes people claimed to see near the water channels. Reggie laughed, saying he'd love to see one up close. The workers later said he seemed unworried by their warnings, dismissing them as old stories. The palm farm was vast, stretching for miles, with rows of palm trees separated by narrow water channels. The ground was soft and muddy from the rain, making some areas slippery. Dragonflies hovered over the water, and mosquitoes filled the air. The only sounds were distant chainsaws and the low croaking of frogs from the ditches. The heat made everything feel still. Reticulated pythons, some of the world's largest snakes, lived in this area. They could grow over 20 feet long and weigh over 200 pounds. These snakes hunt by hiding near water, waiting for animals like pigs or dogs. Sometimes they even attack people. Though rare, the snakes had moved closer to where people worked due to the destruction of their natural habitats. Local people knew to avoid these snakes, some carrying long knives for protection near the water. By late afternoon, Reggie hadn't returned to camp. Amir grew worried and walked toward the last place he'd seen him. The farm was almost silent, save for the constant buzzing of insects. Then Amir froze. One of Reggie's boots was stuck in the mud near the water channel. A few feet away, an enormous python lay coiled. The snake's middle section was hugely swollen, as if it had eaten a very large animal. Amir stood still, then shouted for Luffy and the other workers. Soon, 5 men stood watching the snake as it slowly moved toward the bushes. The swollen middle part dragged heavily on the ground, leaving a deep track in the mud. The workers grabbed sticks and long poles, trying to poke at the snake from a distance. The python hissed loudly, opening its mouth wide to reveal its curved teeth, coiling up in defense. The snake was massive, about 15 feet long. None of the workers dared approach it. The farm supervisor arrived and immediately called the local police. While they waited, the men watched the snake carefully. At one point, the swollen belly seemed to shift slightly, as if something inside was moving. I remember reading about a python that had swallowed a man whole. It's a chilling image that stays with you. The broad, uneven bulge pressing against the snake's skin, a shape clearly too large to be any normal animal. The horror those farm workers must have felt. The police, arriving on the scene, decided they had to kill the python. It took a while, several people striking the snake with knives and poles before it finally stopped moving. The air, I imagine, was thick with dread. Then came the slow, disturbing process of cutting open the snake's belly. Mud and fluid mixed together as the knife sliced through the scales. And inside, curled up and covered in slime, was Reggie's body. His clothes were soaked and torn. His notebook and phone, damaged by moisture, were found nearby, covered in mud. He was eventually flown back home. After that, I believe the farm management quietly put up new warning signs near the water channels, advising workers never to travel alone. Now I want to tell you about Clare Johnson. It was March 15th, 2014, in Ranthambore National Park, Rajasthan, India. The air was cool after a very hot day. The camping area was dark, the lights turned off hours earlier. Inside one of the tents, 2 travellers were sleeping, unaware that a snake had quietly crawled inside. Clare was 26 years old, from Melbourne, Australia. She was a graphic designer who had quit her job to travel around Asia for a year. She had saved for almost 2 years to make this trip happen. She wanted to see as much of the world as possible before returning to full-time work. Her friends knew her as adventurous but careful. She always researched the places she stayed, carried medical supplies, and kept a detailed blog for her family. Visiting Ranthambore was a dream for her. She longed to photograph wild tigers. She'd even seen one that day, a female near a waterhole, though it was far away. She was staying at a cheap eco-camp outside the park gates, sharing a tent with Lara, a German student she had met on the train from Jaipur. The camp was basic but clean, with tents built on raised wooden platforms. Clare was meticulous about keeping their tent organized. Every night, she'd shake out her shoes, and the tent entrance was zipped up properly. That evening was cool for March, so she zipped the canvas door all the way closed, leaving only a small opening for fresh air. The camp was next to dry grassland with thorny acacia trees and tall grass. At night, insects buzzed and clicked, and they could sometimes hear peacocks calling. The ground around the tents was hard dirt covered with leaves and small rocks. This environment was perfect for reptiles that hunted during the cool hours before sunrise. Spectacled cobras are common in Rajasthan. They are recognizable by the circular pattern on the back of their hood. These snakes usually avoid people, but in the early morning, they sometimes enter human areas seeking mice or rats, or simply warmth. Adult cobras can grow up to 6 feet long and have a potent venom that affects the nervous system, strong enough to kill a person within hours without medical treatment. Local tour guides always warn campers to check their bedding and shake out their clothes before sleeping, because snakes sometimes crawl inside unnoticed. That night, sometime after 4:06 in the morning, Lara woke up to a soft rustling sound near the bottom of the tent. Half asleep, She grabbed her phone and turned on the flashlight. The light revealed something that made her freeze. A spectacled cobra coiled up just inches from Clare's sleeping bag. The snake had its head raised slightly. Before Lara could react, Clare moved in her sleep and stretched out her leg. Her bare ankle touched the snake's body. The cobra bit her twice very quickly, sinking its fangs into the soft skin just above her heel. The bites happened so fast that Lara almost didn't see it until Clare suddenly moved and gasped. Lara screamed, waking up everyone in the camp. Clare sat up and grabbed her ankle, where 2 small holes from the snake's teeth were visible. Camp workers ran to their tent with flashlights. They saw the snake crawling out. Clare's breathing became fast and shallow, and people said her eyes looked strange and glassy. When she tried to stand, her legs gave way as if they couldn't support her. Her voice was quiet when she said her legs felt like jelly before she fell back onto her sleeping mat. The camp didn't have any antivenom, so the staff put Clare in a jeep to drive her to the hospital. Lara went with her, pressing a scarf above the bite marks to try to slow the spread of the venom. The drive to the nearest hospital took more than 40 minutes on bumpy roads. Halfway there, Clare stopped responding. Her skin became pale, cold, and damp. When they finally reached the small rural clinic, the medical staff told them there was nothing they could do to save her. I've seen firsthand how quickly things can turn in the wilderness. A moment of carelessness, a misplaced step, and suddenly you're facing a danger you never anticipated. It's a lesson learned through years of archaeological fieldwork, a constant reminder that nature is both beautiful and unforgiving. I've always felt a deep respect for the balance and the potential for imbalance between humans and the natural world. The young German traveller, Lara, never forgot her experience in Australia. Later that day, her parents were contacted through the Australian Embassy. They asked for her body to be cremated following the local customs. The camp management, understandably shaken, decided not to close down their business. Instead, they hired a local snake expert who started giving weekly talks to new guests. These talks taught people how to check their tents properly and where to keep lights on at night to avoid problems with snakes. Lara eventually went back to Germany, and she later wrote a detailed story about what happened on a travel website. Her story warned other backpackers to always check their tents, bedding, and shoes when staying in areas where snakes might be present. This post was shared quietly for years, a serious reminder to travelers who thought sleeping close to nature was romantic without understanding the real dangers. This incident shows how important it is for travelers to take safety precautions seriously when staying in wilderness areas. Even experienced and careful travelers like Clare can face unexpected dangers when wild animals and humans share the same spaces. The tragedy serves as a reminder that proper preparation and awareness can be life-saving when traveling in remote natural areas. Now, let me tell you about something that happened on September 9th, 2015, in a small lime orchard outside a rural town near Veracruz, Mexico. Jorge Cruz was 42 years old and had worked in this lime orchard his whole life. He got up before sunrise every day to check the water systems, cut tree branches and teach his oldest son how to tell if the fruit was healthy or sick. People in the village knew Jorge as someone they could count on. He was the type of person who would fix broken carts for his neighbors and lend them tools without expecting anything back. Jorge had a habit from when he was a child. He liked to work without shoes. He said this helped him feel the ground better and move faster when he had to climb the lower tree branches. The afternoon was very hot, and the air felt heavy. The sun beat down on the leaves so hard that nothing seemed to move. This orchard had belonged to the same family for many years. On this particular day, the normal work routine would be interrupted by something that changed everything in just one moment. Jorge was working with two neighbors, Raul and Mateo. They were picking limes on the far side of the grove, where workers had made a pile of cut tree branches after cleaning the area recently. The three men were making jokes about how hot it was as they moved between the low tree branches, putting bunches of limes into bags. Jorge was wearing his wide hat pushed back on his head and an old faded shirt. He reached for a low branch and shifted his weight to pull the fruit closer to him. The ground in the orchard was hard dirt covered with cut leaves and thin roots. The pile of cut branches provided cool shade for mice, rats, and small reptiles. There was a patch of wild plants that marked the edge of the orchard, and the low treetops made long shadows that moved across the ground. It was very quiet, so small sounds like fruit falling to the ground or clothes rubbing against tree bark were easy to hear. The men were focused on their work and conversation, not paying attention to potential dangers around them. A type of poisonous snake called the tersopielo, Bropsasper, locally known as the naka, lives in Central America. These snakes are thick-bodied and usually grow to be 3 to 5 ft long. They have very dangerous poison that destroys skin and muscle, causes severe bleeding in the area where they bite, and can affect blood clotting and blood press throughout the body. These snakes blend in perfectly with fallen leaves and often stay completely still until someone steps close to them. When they bite someone, it usually causes extreme pain, and the area swells up very quickly. That morning, neighbors had been talking about seeing more snakes since the recent rains. Jorge's wife had told him to wear boots while cleaning brush and debris. The pile of cut branches where they were working was a temporary heap of trimmings, exactly the kind of place where snakes like to hide. Raul later said he had warned Jorge to be careful, but Jorge waved off their concerns and said he would work quickly. When Jorge shifted his position, the snake attack happened instantly. The snake burst out from the leaves and bit the skin just above his ankle. Raul and Mateo heard Jorge make a short, sharp cry of pain and saw him pull his foot back while grabbing at the wound. Before the other men could react, the snake bit him a second time. Dark blood spotted the dirt where his foot had been. The pain hit Jorge immediately and was very severe. He bent over double and dropped the fruit he was holding. Within just a few minutes, his lower leg began to swell and the skin started to look bruised and discolored. He began throwing up and sweating heavily, and his face became very pale. Raul quickly tied a piece of cloth above the bite marks, and they kept Jorge's leg still by making a splint from a broom handle. A neighbor brought a small wooden cart, and they lifted Jorge into it, then pushed the cart toward the dirt road that led back to the village. The trip to the clinic was bumpy and slow. Dust covered Jorge's damp skin, and he became confused, speaking in broken words and going in and out of consciousness. At the small village clinic, a nurse looked at his swollen leg and noticed that his pulse was weak and his blood press was low. The clinic had basic medical supplies, but no antivenom, the special medicine needed to treat snake bites. The staff used their radio to call the regional health center asking for help, but the nearest supply of antivenom and a properly equipped ambulance was hours away. Jorge's condition got worse. He became more and more disoriented, and his breathing became shallow. The medical staff could not help him get better. By evening, Jorge had died at the clinic, despite their efforts to stop the bleeding and help him breathe. Raul said they tried to kill the snake, but it disappeared into the thick peel. I've always been drawn to stories where a community confronts the unexpected, where familiar landscapes reveal hidden dangers. There's a village I read about recently, where the lime trees continued to produce fruit. But each harvest season began with a serious reminder to all workers about being careful. It's a small, poignant detail, but it speaks volumes about how tragedy can reshape our awareness. I came across another story, this one from May 2nd, 2018, when the air over the Cross River felt heavy and still. Mina Belogan, a 19-year-old, had just returned from university. She loved spending her afternoons at the river, often bringing her cousins to swim with her. The older villagers warned them about snakes being more active during the dry season. But Mina didn't believe danger lurked in the shallow water. On that day, she convinced 4 of her cousins to join her. They left their sandals and shirts on the rocks before wading into the cool water. Mina had plans to start a small community project when she returned to school, something that would teach younger children how to swim safely. She had always thought of the river as a place full of life, not danger. The river's surface looked calm, reflecting the cloudless sky, but underneath something was moving. The part of the river they chose was wide and shallow, with muddy banks. Even though it was a bright day, the thick plants on the other side cast long shadows over the deeper parts of the water. African rock pythons, the biggest snakes on the continent, can grow to be more than 20 feet long. They hunt by staying still until an animal comes close, then bite with powerful jaws before wrapping their body around their prey. During the dry season, they often hunt near shrinking water sources, where animals come to drink. Earlier that week, an older fisherman had warned Mina's uncle that he had seen a very large python lying on a log nearby. Mina had been in the water for almost an hour when one of her cousins saw something long and dark moving toward them. At first, they thought it was just a tree branch. But when it curved and moved silently across the water's surface, fear spread through the group. The shape moved forward quickly, revealing the patterned body of an enormous python. The snake attacked with shocking speed. Its jaws locked onto Mina's side before its body wrapped around her. Her cousin screamed as the snake's coils got tighter, forcing the air out of her lungs. The water became violent as Mina fought against the snake, then went still as the python dragged her into deeper water. The children ran back to the village, screaming for help. It took several minutes for the men to grab their long knives and run to the river. By the time they arrived, the snake had pulled Mina deeper under. The men went into the water and cut at the python until it finally let her go. When they pulled her onto the muddy riverbank, she had clearly been underwater for too long. Her skin was cold and pale, and her lips were a deep blue. The villagers tried pressing on her chest and blowing air into her mouth. Water came out of her mouth and nose, mixing with the mud. Their efforts continued for several minutes, but there was no sign that she was breathing. Mina's body was placed on a mat near the water as the villagers gathered in silence. For weeks afterward, the river bend remained empty. Fishermen refused to throw their nets there, calling the area cursed. The village learned that even familiar places could hide unexpected dangers. Mina's dream of teaching children to swim safely took on new meaning as the community worked to prevent similar tragedies. I've seen how easily a moment of distraction can turn into tragedy, and the story of Sammy, the snake handler, is one that sticks with me. He was experienced, trusted, and careful, yet even he wasn't immune to the risks. It reminds me that no matter how skilled we are, we're all vulnerable to the unexpected. Sammy was a steady presence at the festival, teaching volunteers and prioritizing hands-on experience. Locals trusted him because he was meticulous and corrected mistakes gently. But this year, the festival was bigger, the schedule tighter, and Sammy, despite skipping breakfast and feeling tired from the sun, kept working. He felt responsible. The setup of the roundup, with its shallow snake pits and raised platforms, prioritized visibility over safety. The smells of fried food and car exhaust mingled with dust, and while there were shade cloths, the space was cramped, limiting opportunities for both people and animals to cool down. Western diamondback rattlesnakes, potent pit vipers, can strike with surprising speed, and even skilled handlers can be bitten when snakes are stressed by heat and repeated handling. Earlier that day, organizers had reminded everyone to take breaks, prompted by a small accident that morning. Sammy heard the instructions, but the crowd drew him back. He took a heavy snake, stepped into the pit, and lifted it with a practiced motion. For a moment, the crowd relaxed, calmed by his presence. But then the snake twisted, lunged, and its fangs pierced the soft tissue near Sammy's elbow. Pain shot through his arm. He signaled he was... But his face turned red, and sweat formed on his forehead. He kept talking, but his breathing grew shallow, and he asked for a chair. The bite area swelled rapidly, and discoloration spread down his forearm. Volunteers moved him to the first aid tent as the swelling moved towards his shoulder, the skin darkening with bruising. Paramedics applied Prez, started IV fluids, and administered anti-venom. His breathing grew shallow, his skin cold and blotched. Despite their efforts, his blood press collapsed, and his pulse faded. He didn't survive. In the aftermath, friends and fellow handlers organized training sessions, inviting medics to review emergency procedures. A younger relative began helping at the pits, prioritizing breaks and hydration. The festival board documented the incident, creating a checklist for demonstrations, handling time, breaks, and evacuation plans. This tragedy stands in stark contrast to the story of Erica Winslow, operating an illegal primate research station in Cameroon. It was March 15, 2016, in the dense rainforests near the Sangha River. Erica, a former wildlife photographer, had been running the facility for 3 years after her permits expired, refusing to surrender Caesar, an 18-year-old gorilla. Her demanding personality and entitled behavior had made her unpopular with local officials. She relied on YouTube videos and outdated zoo management methods, and her social media posts showed increasingly erratic behavior as she attempted to discipline Caesar. The massive silverback had been displaying heightened aggression for weeks, and villagers reported loud chest beating throughout the night. Caesar had been refusing to enter his night shelter, defying Erica's commands entirely. The Ministry of Forestry and Wildlife was building a case to seize the animals, but corruption and bureaucratic delays. I'll never forget reading about Erica. The details haunted me for weeks. A 375-pound silverback gorilla named Caesar in a private enclave, and the tragic evening that unfolded. It serves as a stark reminder. These aren't pets. Warning signs had been mounting for months, I learned, as Caesar's behavior deteriorated. Western lowland gorillas possess the strength of 10 humans. Their hands can exert crushing force. Their canine teeth tear through flesh and bone. Despite their peaceful nature in the wild, captive gorillas under stress can become unpredictable, especially when they perceive a threat. Caesar had been showing classic signs of psychological distress, the report said, stemming from improper captivity and inadequate social interaction. These magnificent creatures require specialized care that few private individuals can provide. On that evening, Erica's frustration reached its breaking point. Caesar sat defiantly in the center of his enclave, ignoring her increasingly loud commands to enter his night quarters. Determined to assert her dominance, she grabbed a makeshift electric prod fashioned from old logging equipment and unlocked the heavy gate to his 20x30-foot reinforced pen. A fatal decision. As she stepped inside, wielding the electrical device, Caesar's behavior shifted instantly from passive resistance to explosive aggression. The 375-pound silverback charged across the enclave with terrifying speed. His massive body slammed into Erica's chest, launching her backward into the metal fence. The rusted metal cut deep into her back as Caesar's enormous hands grabbed her face, his thumbs pressing into her eye sockets with crushing prise. Blood streamed down her cheeks as his fingernails tore at her skin. Caesar's powerful jaws clamped down on her left ear, severing it completely. Erica's screams echoed across the empty rainforest as the gorilla grabbed her right hand, still clutching the makeshift prod. His bite force crushed 3 fingers at the knuckles, severing them entirely. The enraged primate lifted Erica's body off the ground and shook her violently. Her shoulder dislocated as Caesar slammed her face first into the concrete floor. Her nose shattered on impact, creating a pool of blood beneath her head. The gorilla then grabbed her right leg with both massive hands and twisted, snapping her femur bone. Caesar positioned himself over Erica's prone form and brought both fists down on her rib cage. 6 ribs cracked simultaneously, the broken bones puncturing both lungs. Her breathing became shallow as blood filled her chest cavity. For his final attack, Caesar grabbed Erica's head between his massive palms and squeezed. Her skull cracked like an eggshell, and brain matter leaked onto the concrete floor. Her body went completely limp. The silverback sat calmly beside the lifeless body for the next 4 hours, occasionally grooming blood from his hands. Local villagers discovered the scene the following morning. Cameroonian authorities launched an immediate investigation into the illegal operation, while wildlife officials worked to safely relocate Caesar to the Lima Wildlife Centre. The incident sparked renewed debate about foreign nationals operating illegal wildlife facilities and the dangers posed to both operators and local communities. Government agents seized all remaining animals from the property within days. Erica's family released a statement expressing their grief while acknowledging the inherent dangers of keeping such powerful animals in captivity. It was July 22, 2017, along the pristine banks of Idaho's Salmon River, where towering pine trees cast long shadows across the rushing water. The remote wilderness area had become the perfect destination for the Price family's annual camping adventure. Landon Price, a 34-year-old construction foreman, had driven his wife Sarah and their 2 young children, Emma and Jake, to this secluded spot 30 yards from the riverbank. What made this trip different was the modified dog crate secured in the back of their pickup truck containing their most unusual family member. 2 years earlier, Landon had purchased Scout, a mountain cougar cub, from an exotic animal dealer operating in the grey areas of wildlife law. The construction worker's overconfident personality had convinced him that his experience with domestic animals would translate perfectly to raising a wild predator. He kept the growing cougar in a reinforced shed behind their suburban home, telling curious neighbors it was simply an unusually large dog breed. Sarah, an elementary school teacher, had grown increasingly uncomfortable with Scout's presence, especially after the children began complaining that the animal's eyes looked mean during feeding times. The warning signs had been mounting for weeks. Scout had killed 3 neighborhood cats in the past month, leaving their partially eaten remains scattered around the property. Just 2 weeks prior, the cougar had escaped from his enclos and stalked the mail carrier for several blocks before Landon managed to recapture him. Local game wardens had received multiple reports of unusual animal sounds coming from the Price residence, but bureaucratic delays had prevented immediate investigation. Mountain cougars are apex predators perfectly designed for stealth hunting with powerful hind legs capable of propelling their muscular bodies over 20 feet in a single bound. Adult males can weigh up to 140 pounds of pure muscle, equipped with razor-sharp retractable claws and canine teeth designed to deliver precise killing bites to the neck and spine. Unlike domestic cats, it's a fatal error to assume that a wild animal, even one raised in captivity, loses its instincts. I've seen this play out in tragic ways. In fact, those instincts can become even more pronounced when the animal is in an unfamiliar environment, where territorial impulses are heightened. I remember one case in particular. Landon made the mistake of releasing Scout, a 3-year-old cougar, from her transport crate, thinking he could let her stretch and explore. He truly thought Scout's upbringing had somehow tamed her wild nature, treating her more like a house cat than a predator. As his family set up their fishing gear, Scout emerged from confinement and immediately began surveying the unfamiliar territory. Her tawny coat blended perfectly with the brush. I can almost see her yellow eyes methodically scanning the area, cataloguing every movement, every sound. The 140-pound cougar's predatory instincts kicked in the moment Landon walked toward the river to fill water containers. Scout's pupils dilated as she crouched low behind a fallen log, her powerful muscles coiling. Her tail began twitching, the classic hunting pattern, as she calculated distance and timing. In complete silence, Scout launched herself, covering 20 feet in a single leap. Her powerful body struck Landon squarely in the back. The cougar's 4-inch claws sank into Landon's shoulders and back, perfectly designed to grip struggling prey. The predator's jaws clamped down on the back of Landon's neck with surgical precision. Scout's canine teeth, evolved for this killing technique, punctured the cervical vertebrae and severed the spinal cord instantly. The bite caused immediate paralysis from the neck down. Landon, unable to move, drowned in the river within 90 seconds. His body went limp as Scout maintained her grip, following millions of years of evolutionary programming to when her prey was subdued before feeding. The cougar then did something else instinctive. She dragged Landon's lifeless body toward the brush, caching her kill away from potential scavengers. Sarah, Landon's wife, grabbed their children and rushed them to the safety of their locked truck, where they remained for 3 terrifying hours until park rangers arrived. Authorities immediately launched an investigation into the illegal possession of the mountain cougar, while wildlife officials worked to safely capture Scout. The incident reignited debates about private exotic animal ownership and the inherent dangers these predators pose. There was another case, on September 8, 2015, on a sprawling ranch in South Texas. The remote 50-acre estate sat miles from the nearest neighbor, providing perfect isolation for Marcus Ellison's dangerous hobby. The 41-year-old oil rig worker had converted an old barn into a makeshift big cat facility, complete with reinforced enclosures and feeding areas. Marcus shared the property with his girlfriend, Lisa Chen, a 28-year-old veterinary technician who had grown increasingly concerned about their unusual housemate. 4 years earlier, Marcus had purchased Luna, a 6-month-old jaguar cub, from a black market dealer operating along the Texas-Mexico border. His thrill-seeking personality and desire to collect dangerous animals as status symbols had driven him to spend his oil rig earnings on exotic pets. Luna had grown from an adorable, spotted kitten into a powerful, 180-pound predator. But Marcus genuinely believed their bond from her cubhood would protect him from any danger. Lisa had been pressuring him for months to surrender Luna to a proper sanctuary, especially after witnessing the jaguar's increasingly erratic behavior. The warning signs had been mounting steadily over the past week. Luna had been refusing all food for 4 consecutive days, despite Marcus offering her favorite cuts of meat. The jaguar had begun territorial marking throughout the house, leaving her scent on furniture and walls in a clear display of dominance. Her obsessive pacing had worn visible paths in the dirt floor of her enclosure, and Lisa noticed that Luna's pupils remained constantly dilated, indicating severe psychological stress. Neighbors living miles away reported hearing strange vocalizations echoing across the countryside during the night hours. Jaguars are the third largest big cats in the world and possess the strongest bite force of any feline species, capable of crushing turtle shells and caiman skulls with ease. These apex predators are perfectly designed killing machines, with muscular bodies built for explosive power and jaws that can exert over 1,500 pounds of prise per square inch. Unlike other big cats that typically suffocate their prey, jaguars deliver precise killing bites directly through the skull or spine, making them one of the most efficient predators in the animal kingdom. Even hand-raised jaguars retain all their wild instincts and can become unpredictably aggressive when stressed or challenged. Marcus made his fatal mistake when he decided to enter Luna's enclosure without backup or safety equipment. Concerned about her 4-day food refusal, he believed their years-long bond would allow him to safely investigate her condition. He unlocked the gate to her 30 by 40-foot pen and stepped inside, carrying only a small flashlight to illuminate the darkness. Luna sat motionless in the shadows, her yellow eyes reflecting the beam as he approached. The 180-pound jaguar had been waiting for this moment. As Marcus knelt 15 feet away and extended his hand in what he believed was a gesture of comfort, Luna's predatory instincts took complete control. Her powerful muscles, coiled like steel springs, propelled her across the enclosure in 2 swift bounds. Luna's attack was swift and devastatingly precise. Her massive body slammed into Marcus's chest with tremendous force. I've seen the aftermath of predator attacks, the grim scenes that linger long after the event. I remember reading about Marcus, the Texas man who thought he could tame a jaguar. Luna, the jaguar, delivered a battering ram's force, throwing him back onto the concrete. His flashlight skittered uselessly into the shadows. Her jaws locked with deadly precision around his throat. The bite force of 1,500 pounds per square inch instantly crushed his windpipe and severed both carotid arteries. He lost consciousness in seconds. Luna held her grip for 3 full minutes. Instinct driving her to and her prey was subdued. Lisa discovered the scene the next morning. Luna sat calmly, grooming blood from her paws. Marcus's body lay partially consumed. The incident reignited debates about exotic animal ownership. His family released a statement acknowledging the inherent dangers, urging others to learn from their tragedy. Then there's the story of Brianna Ellis, a 26-year-old marine biology student in Homestead, Florida. She had a backyard pond system, a 40x60 FT artificial water feature, home to an American alligator named Brutus. She'd rescued him from a failing roadside attraction 2 years prior, believing she could provide a better environment for him while studying his behavior. Her landlord, of course, had no idea a 350-pound apex predator was living in his backyard. The warning signs had been escalating for a month. Brutus had become increasingly aggressive, lunging at the pond's edge during feeding. Neighbors complained of strange splashing sounds at night. American alligators are among the most efficient predators, virtually unchanged for millions of years. Adults can reach 14 feet and weigh over 800 pounds, with jaws capable of nearly 3,000 pounds of pres per square inch. Brianna made her fatal mistake as the Florida sun began to set. She needed to retrieve pH testing equipment she'd dropped in the pond. Despite her friends urging to use a net, she insisted on entering the water herself. Dusk is the most active hunting period for alligators. As she waded in, Brutus began his approach, moving through the water with incredible precision, his massive body creating no wake. She bent to retrieve her equipment, unaware that Brutus had positioned himself just 6 feet away. The alligator remained perfectly motionless beneath the surface, preparing for his assault. The attack came with devastating force. Brutus launched himself upward, his jaws opening wide, encompassing Brianna's entire right thigh. His jaw press crushed her femur instantly. Her screams pierced the evening air as Brutus immediately began his signature death roll. The alligator spun his body rapidly, tearing her leg completely away at the hip joint within seconds. The severed femoral artery released massive amounts of blood. Before she could escape, Brutus attacked again, clamping down on her torso, his teeth puncturing her rib cage. There are moments when the wild reminds us just how indifferent it can be. I remember reading about a woman named Brianna dragged into the depths of a pond by an alligator named Brutus. Held underwater for nearly 2 minutes as her lungs filled with water and blood. The dive team recovered only scattered remains. Brutus retreated to the deepest part of the pond with his kill. It all led to changes in local laws about owning exotic animals in residential areas. It reminds me of another chilling case. October 3rd, 2016, in the Adirondack Mountains of upstate New York. 15 miles from the nearest neighbor, a weathered log cabin stood, home to Shah Gallagher. He was a 38-year-old former wildlife rehabilitator, disgraced and embittered. He'd retreated to this inherited family property after losing his license, an incident involving a bear leaving him with a permanent limp. Sean shared his sanctuary with Kodiak, an 8-year-old American black bear weighing 400 pounds. He'd illegally acquired Kodiak as an injured cub 3 years prior, claiming he rescued him from certain death. His obsession with proving his rehabilitation methods were superior led him to keep Kodiak, despite losing his credentials. The bear lived in a reinforced room inside the cabin, a setup that grew more inadequate as Kodiak matured. Sean's journal entries revealed growing paranoia about the bear's intentions, his own mental state deteriorating from years of isolation. The warning signs had been escalating for weeks. Kodiak had been systematically destroying the cabin's interior, tearing apart furniture, clawing the wooden walls. He became increasingly aggressive when Sean tried to limit his food, displaying territorial behavior that should have been a clear warning. Most concerning was Kodiak's obsessive testing of the doors and windows, repeatedly pushing against them as if calculating escape routes. American black bears, despite their smaller size compared to grizzlies, are deceptively powerful. Adult males can reach speeds of 30 miles per hour, possess the strength to overturn boulders weighing hundreds of pounds. Their jaws can exert over 800 pounds of press per square inch, easily crushing human skulls. Their 4-inch claws, designed for climbing and digging, are devastatingly effective weapons. Black bears are naturally nocturnal, most active during twilight and nighttime, when their predatory instincts are heightened. Sean made his fatal mistake at 2:30 in the morning, when he decided to enter Kodiak's reinforced room to retrieve his damaged laptop and camera. The bear appeared to be sleeping peacefully in the corner of the 15-20-foot space, his massive form barely visible in the darkness. Sean desperately needed to recover his electronics before they were completely destroyed. He stepped quietly into the room carrying only a small flashlight, believing Kodiak was in deep sleep. What Sean failed to realize was that Kodiak had been awake for hours, waiting with the patience that makes black bears such effective predators. The bear's naturally nocturnal behavior meant his senses were at peak alertness, and captivity had made him increasingly territorial. The 400-pound black bear moved with surprising speed and agility. Kodiak rose to his full height of 7 feet and charged across the room in 3 powerful strides. Sean had no time to react as the bear's enormous frame filled his vision. Kodiak's first strike came from his massive right paw, equipped with 4-inch claws designed for climbing and digging. The blow struck Sean squarely in the chest with tremendous force, claws raking 4 parallel gashes across his rib cage that penetrated deep into muscle and bone. The impact launched Sean backward into the reinforced wall with bone-crushing force. Before Sean could even attempt to defend himself, Kodiak pressed his attack with methodical efficiency. The bear's powerful jaws clamped down on Sean's head, encompassing his skull from temple to temple. Kodiak's bite force of 800 pounds per square inch crushed Sean's skull like an eggshell, causing immediate and catastrophic brain trauma. Brain matter leaked between the bear's teeth as he shook his massive head violently. Sean's body went completely limp within seconds, but Kodiak's defensive rage kept driving the assault. The bear mauled with relentless power, claws raking and jaws crushing bone as if to eliminate a threat rather than feed. In his fury, Kodiak tore into Sean's torso, ribs splintering under the prez, leaving a scene of raw devastation born not of hunger, but of instinctive dominance and fear. The attack continued for 15 minutes before Kodiak finally retreated to his corner, leaving Sean's partially consumed remains scattered across the wooden floor. The bear sat calmly, grooming blood from its claws and muzzle. Sean's body was discovered 3 days later, when concerned neighbors noticed smoke was no longer rising from the cabin's chimney. Local authorities launched an investigation. I've always been drawn to the stories where humans and animals intersect, sometimes with tragic consequences. There was a case back in 2015, outside of Houston, Texas. It involved a mechanic, a Bengal tiger, and a fatal lapse in judgment. The details still haunt me. The immediate investigation started with the illegal possession of a black bear, while wildlife officials worked to tranquilize and relocate it to a proper sanctuary. It was March 22nd, 2015, and the air was heavy with that early spring humidity unique to the outskirts of Houston. Inside a chain-link enclave, behind a small ranch-style house, a Bengal tiger paced. Michael Torres was 41, a mechanic known for his patience and love for tinkering. He preferred engines to people, really. He had lived alone since his divorce, spending his free time fixing up old cars and tending to a collection of animals. It started small, ball pythons and iguanas. Then came a serval, and finally Raja, a 6-year-old male Bengal tiger acquired from a private breeder outside San Antonio. He kept the tiger in a large fenced enclosure on his property, reinforced with corrugated steel and heavy wire. Neighbors occasionally saw him through the fence, walking beside the tiger with a chain lead, talking to it like a companion. He believed Raja recognized his scent and tone, claiming the animal would never hurt him. When asked why he took such risks, he would shrug and say it was about trust, earning respect through calm handling, not fear. That afternoon was overcast and sticky. The enclosure smelled of straw and damp soil. A friend, Luis Alvarez, had stopped by to borrow a socket wrench and lingered, watching as Michael carried tools toward the cage. Raja was pacing more than usual, tail lashing, eyes following every movement. Construction noise from a nearby property had carried through the air all morning. Michael said the tiger didn't like loud sounds, but would settle once he started cleaning. Bengal tigers are apex predators, capable of crushing bone with a bite exceeding 1,000 lb of pres. Even those raised from cubs retain the same hunting reflexes, stalking, ambushing, and using sudden bursts of force to subdue prey. Male tigers can weigh more than 400 lb and strike with enough power to shatter ribs. Their attacks rarely involve warning growls. Movement itself is often the trigger. Lewis stood about 20 yards away, leaning against the fence, while Michael opened the inner gate. He was replacing old straw, raking droppings into a bin. For convenience, he left the outer gate partially open so he could move a wheelbarrow through more easily. It wasn't the first time he'd done it. Luis mentioned that as he worked, Raja continued pacing, muscles tensing with each pass along the fence. Michael glanced up once, muttered something under his breath, and bent again to lift a shovel. Luis later told investigators he saw the tiger freeze mid-stride. Its ears flattened, body crouched low to the ground, tail twitching rapidly. A second later, Raja lunged. The impact made a hollow sound, metal and flesh colliding. The tiger's paw raked across Michael's face, knocking him flat on his back. He screamed, clutching his jaw, trying to crawl towards the gate. Raja followed in 2 strides and clamped its jaws around his neck and shoulder, dragging him deeper into the enclosure. Luis shouted and threw a wrench that clattered uselessly off the fencing. Michael swung the shovel's handle upward, striking Raja's snout once, but the tiger's jaws tightened. Luis grabbed handfuls of gravel and hurled them, screaming for the tiger to stop. But Raja shook its head violently, lifting and slamming Michael's limp body against the ground. Michael's arm twitched once, then went still. Raja kept biting, dragging the body by the shoulder until it was half under a metal shelter. Luis ran for his truck and called 911. Dispatchers logged the call at 5:42 p.m. When deputies arrived 10 minutes later, they held position until animal control arrived with tranquilizer rifles. But when Raja charged the fencing, one officer fired his service rifle, striking the tiger in the shoulder. Raja collapsed near the shelter, exhaling once before going still. Michael's body showed extensive trauma, massive lacerations to the neck, chest, and abdomen. One arm had been partially severed, and his face was unrecognizable from the first strike. Investigators noted that, despite his experience, he had no secondary containment system, no safety barrier or secondary lock. The open gate gave the tiger full access once the attack began. Animal control removed Raja's body that night. Michael's sister handled arrangements quietly, declining interviews. His funeral was attended by fewer than 20 people. Neighbors left flowers at the fence. The straw inside still stained dark where the attack happened. Then there was the case in Surabaya, Indonesia, on January the 14th, 2016. The morning air hung heavy with humidity. The sounds of the city were still distant, beyond the industrial edges of the port. Behind a low row of warehouses, one lot stood apart, quiet except for the occasional clank of metal and the faint scrape of claws against concrete. Within those walls, a private experiment in control was nearing its inevitable breaking point. Ahmad Firdos was 34, an auto parts importer who had built a modest business supplying components to repair shops across East Java. To most who knew him, he was patient and meticulous, the kind of man who stayed late to sort invoices or fix a broken compressor himself. But his fascination with exotic animals was no secret. Years earlier, during a trip to Flores, he had been captivated by the Komodo dragon. Its slow, deliberate movements, the quiet dominance in its stare. When an acquaintance from the wildlife trade offered him a hatchling, Ahmad accepted, paying in cash and never telling his family. Over the next 2 years, the reptile grew from a curious pet into a formidable presence. The pen Ahmad built behind his warehouse was solid, thick steel mesh reinforced with concrete. I've always found it unsettling how easily a creature can shift from a symbol of companionship to a predator. I remember reading about a man in Indonesia who kept a Komodo dragon at his warehouse. He'd raised it since it was small. He fed it by hand, and he thought it knew him. But one Thursday morning, that dragon turned on him. The man, Ahmad, had skipped feeding the dragon the previous evening. He noticed the dragon's water basin was overturned. He went into the enclosure to clean it. The dragon was in the far corner, motionless. Komodo dragons can grow up to 10 feet long, and their bite can crush bone. Their venom is full of toxins that cause rapid blood loss and lower blood pressure. They're ambush predators, capable of bursts of speed. In captivity, they can become aggressive if they're handled too much or underfed. Ahmad's co-worker, Yudi, heard a clang of metal and a cry. He ran toward the back and saw Ahmad fall. The dragon had latched onto his calf, its teeth sunk deep. Ahmad kicked, yelling for Yudi to get help. The dragon released, then lunged again, clamping down on Ahmad's forearm, shaking loose strips of muscle. Yudi grabbed a metal pole and struck the dragon's side. The dragon turned, mouth gaping, tongue flicking. Ahmad crawled backward, leaving a smear of blood. The dragon lunged again, catching his side below the ribs, tearing through skin and tissue. Yudi struck again and again until the creature backed off. Ahmad slumped onto his back, one hand pressed against the wound. The concrete was dark red. Yudi ran to the gate, managed to pull it shut, and locked it. He turned to Ahmad, but it was too late. Later reports confirmed Ahmad had suffered multiple deep lacerations with significant internal bleeding. Veterinarians said the dragon had shown signs of food aggression, triggered when prey or a familiar handler moves suddenly during feeding. The Komodo dragon was sedated and transported to a wildlife rehabilitation center. Officials confirmed it had been obtained through illegal trade. Neighbors remembered Ahmad as generous. But within the warehouse community, the story circulated as a warning. He treated the dragon like a misunderstood companion, never realizing that to it he was always prey. I'll never forget reading the investigators' reconstruction of that attack. It lasted less than 30 seconds. In that brief span, everything changed. The sanctuary sat on rolling pasture, bordered by pines. It was early summer, strong sunlight, restless animals. The air carried the smell of hay and meat from the storage shed. That morning, the enclose were quiet, save for the sound of pacing claws and the creak of metal gates. Aaron arrived early to prepare Bruno's meal, 15 pounds of meat mixed with supplements. Mark had left town the previous evening to visit his sister in Helena. Before leaving, he reminded Aaron to feed Bruno at the usual time, late morning, and to check the water trough afterward. The next day, he texted her around 10, receiving no reply. He assumed she was busy, then began his drive back. When he pulled into the gravel lot just after noon, he noticed the outer gate to the bear enclosure was half open. The feeding pail lay overturned beside it. Seconds later, he heard screaming from beyond the fence line. He ran toward the sound, rounding the corner to see Bruno towering near the feeding platform. Aaron was on the ground beneath him, her right arm torn open from shoulder to wrist. She kicked weakly, her clothes soaked dark with blood. The bear's movements were methodical, broad swipes, a deep huffing sound between each motion. Mark froze for a moment, then shouted Bruno's name and ran for a rake leaning against the fence. The noise drew Bruno's attention immediately. He turned, fur bristling, and lunged. The charge covered the distance in a second. The impact knocked Mark flat, the air leaving his lungs in a single sound. Bruno's paw struck his chest again, the claws sinking deep enough to tear through fabric and skin. Aaron saw Mark roll, trying to crawl back toward the gate, but the bear dropped onto him, pressing its full weight down. Bruno bit into Mark's left shoulder, shaking violently. The bear adjusted its grip, jaws closing on his neck. Investigators later reconstructed the sequence from Aaron's statement and evidence found inside the enclosure. Aaron dragged herself backward, her hand leaving red streaks along the concrete. She made it to the open gate, pushing herself through the dirt until she collapsed near the outer fence. Blood loss blurred her vision, but she heard Mark's shouting, "Stop!" abruptly replaced by heavy breathing and the rhythmic scrape of claws on the ground. Deputies arrived minutes later, responding to a 911 call placed by a neighbor who had heard the screams. They found Bruno standing over Mark's body, huffing and lowering his head as they approached. When an officer fired a warning shot, the bear reared back, roaring. The second volley hit him directly in the chest and shoulder. Bruno staggered, exhaled sharply. The medical report confirmed that Mark had died from blunt and penetrating trauma to the thorax and cervical region. Aaron survived after multiple surgeries to repair her arm and shoulder. Investigators determined that the feeding gate had been improperly secured, allowing Bruno to push through before the pail was placed. Food aggression was cited as the cause, a sudden response to perceived competition over the meal. In the months following the attack, Aaron withdrew from animal work entirely. She sold her training equipment, moved to Missoula, and refused interviews. Friends said she became quiet, often waking from sleep at the faint sound of metal gates or animal breathing. She never returned to the sanctuary grounds. It was August 19, 2017, in the Limpopo province of South Africa. The air was heavy from the previous night's storm, the ground damp and the acacia trees still dripping. At Johan Boer's game lodge, in the lion enclosure beyond the guest bungalows, the large male paced in slow, deliberate circles. By mid-morning, tourists had yet to arrive, and Johan decided to tend to the animal himself, a routine he had done hundreds of times before, one that would end differently this time. Johan was 46, a former ranger who had turned his modest patch of bushland into a profitable wildlife lodge. Known for his confidence around big cats, he was comfortable where others were cautious. Over the years, he had cultivated an image of connection between man and predator. His prized attraction was Simba, a 7-year-old male lion raised at the lodge since cubhood. Tourists paid to pose with him through the fence, and sometimes, for higher fees, Johan would lead them into the outer section of the enclosure for photographs. He saw it as education and conservation, mixed with business. To staff, Johan was competent but stubborn. He had a habit of trusting his instincts over protocols. Employees described him as meticulous with animal care, yet dismissive of warnings when it came to Simba. The lion was full-grown, nearly 500 pounds, and though raised in captivity, he retained the instincts of a wild predator. Still, Johan insisted Simba recognized him as the one constant presence, often entering the cage to clean or adjust the feeding structure alone. Adult male lions, especially those kept in captivity, exhibit erratic behavior when stressed. Their territorial instincts can surge unpredictably, especially after storms, when scents shift and sound travels differently. A single swipe of a paw can break bone. Their bite, over 650 pounds per square inch, is built to crush windpipes. Even with long-term handlers, moments of agitation can become fatal within seconds. According to pieced-together evidence and reports, Simba had been restless since the thunderstorm. The overnight lightning had sent him pacing and roaring through the night, rubbing his mane against the fence. Caretaker Peter LaRue noticed the behavior early and told Johan that morning to postpone cleaning until the animal calmed down. Johan brushed it off, saying the lion got anxious if ignored. Around 9 a.m., Johan took a broom and bucket toward the enclosure, while a visiting maintenance worker tested a new camera. I've always been drawn to stories where the line between human and animal blurs, often with tragic consequences. I remember reading about a lion named Simba, and the details have stayed with me. Simba, who lived at a lodge, attacked and killed a worker named Johan. The attack itself was swift and brutal. Jan, as I understand, was simply sweeping near the feeding platform, speaking softly as he worked. When Simba began circling, his tail flicking sharply. The change was rapid. The lion lowered his head, crouched, and then lunged. The impact knocked Yan to the ground, the broom falling away. Simba's jaws clamped around his shoulder, driving him down. Yan yelled, pushing against the lion's muzzle, but Simba shifted his grip, his teeth sinking into the back of Yan's neck. The sound of deep growling, they say, overpowered Yan's cries. Simba dragged Yan toward the shade, his claws tearing through the man's shirt and skin. Yan tried to roll, kicking at the lion's chest, but the lion's weight crushed his ribs. A broom handle snapped as he tried to wedge it between them. Someone threw water, but it only startled Simba for a moment. Then Simba lunged again, biting into his throat. It was efficient, final. The lion's jaws stayed locked as Yan's body went limp. The growls faded. Within minutes, rangers arrived and fired tranquilizer darts. Simba collapsed beside Yan. They pulled Yan's body free. Autopsy revealed crushing trauma and severe blood loss. The incident was classified as preventable, a result of complacency. Simba was euthanized, and the enclose was sealed. It makes me think about Linda Reeves in Mobile, Alabama, on October 6, 2013. What happened to her also involved a blurring of those lines, and the consequences were just as irreversible. Linda, a retired lab technician, had built an enclose for 2 chimpanzees, Buddy and Rosie, whom she'd raised since they were infants. She treated them like family. But these chimps, Buddy weighing over 130 pounds and Rosie nearing 100, were incredibly strong. Their jaws capable of shattering bone. Her brother, Tom, worried constantly. He had seen them rattle the cage doors when upset, and warned Linda repeatedly that they were no longer controllable. That Sunday morning, Linda carried a bowl of fruit into the enclose. Buddy screeched, bouncing on his knuckles, while Rosie clung to the bars. Linda told them to sit, setting the fruit on a rock. Buddy reached before she gave the signal, grabbing her wrist. She pulled back, scolding him sharply. And then something shifted. Tom saw it immediately. Buddy lunged, knocking Linda backward. The fruit scattered. Rosie screamed, leaping down. Linda's voice rose in short, panicked bursts as Buddy pinned her by the chest, tearing at her hair. Tom dropped his mug and fumbled for his phone to dial 911. Buddy's hands were red, gripping a handful of Linda's scalp. The screams turned ragged as Buddy's teeth closed around her face. He bit through her cheek. Rosie joined, latching onto Linda's arm. Tom ran to the fence, striking it with a shovel while shouting for help. Buddy's head jerked up, eyes wide and black, before he went back to tearing. The fence rattled, but neither chimp reacted for long. I still remember the disbelief that lingered after Linda's funeral. The shared feeling that a bond built over years could turn fatal in seconds. The enclose where it happened was eventually dismantled. Now there's just a bare patch of concrete, faintly stained where the hose couldn't wash everything away. It was April 17th, 2015. A bright, warm afternoon just outside Chicago, Illinois. Yellow school buses were pulling into the parking lot of a small, private animal park. A roadside zoo, really, with fading paint and rust eating through the old fences. Families with strollers mingled with school groups. Teachers with clipboards trying to keep order as students pointed at parrots, goats, and monkeys in cramped pens. Near the middle of the park was the chimpanzee exhibit, set behind a low chain-link railing and a shallow, algae-lined moat. A hand-painted sign read, "No climbing or leaning on fence." Inside, 2 adult males and a younger female lived among wooden climbing structures and a patch of worn grass. The walls were streaked with moisture, and the whole enclosure looked outdated compared to the modern habitats you'd see in larger, accredited zoos. Matthew Collins was 12 years old, a 6th grader on a spring field trip. His mother worked night shifts as a nurse, and his father operated a forklift at a local warehouse. They didn't travel much, but Matthew loved animals and never missed a chance to see them up close. His teachers described him as bright but impulsive, the kind of boy who liked to climb trees, rooftops, anything taller than himself. He carried a second-hand digital camera, saved for by mowing lawns for neighbours. His plan was simple: get the best photos of the chimps out of anyone in his class. By mid-afternoon, the group gathered near the chimp enclosure. The air smelled of hay, damp earth, and the sour trace of leftover feed. The students crowded against the metal barrier, talking and laughing while their teacher gave instructions. Matthew, standing near the back, raised his camera, but couldn't get a clear view past the others. Wanting a better angle, he stepped onto the lower rail for balance, even as a few classmates noticed and motioned for him to stop. He ignored them, focused on his shot, and leaned forward. The railing was slick with humidity, and the ledge beneath his shoe gave slightly. As he leaned forward to center the chimps in the frame, his foot slipped. A few students gasped as his arms windmilled for balance. Then he dropped over the rail and into the pit below, landing hard on his right side and rolling onto his stomach with a groan. From above, teachers screamed his name. A few kids started crying. For a moment, the enclosure was silent, except for the soft panting of the chimps. Then one of the males, an older, broad-shouldered chimp named Bo, stood upright, bristling with tension. He gave a sharp hoot, slapped the dirt, and started toward the boy. The younger male followed, puffing air through his lips in short bursts. Visitors who were close enough later said the sounds were chilling. Deep hoots that rose in pitch, the rhythmic drumming of palms on the ground. The 2 chimps stopped about 10 feet away, heads tilted, eyes fixed on the strange figure that had dropped into their space. Bo took 2 quick steps forward and grabbed a fistful of Matthew's shirt. Matthew screamed and tried to crawl backward, but the chimp's grip was iron. Bo's first strike wasn't a feeding bite. It was a dominance blow, a sharp smack to the side of the head that knocked the boy sideways. Then came the bite, a hard, fast clamp on the arm near the wrist. The smaller male joined in from the other side, pulling at the boy's sleeve and striking his shoulder. The sounds of hitting and tearing mixed with hoots and panicked screams from above. A zookeeper stationed near a nearby enclosure heard the commotion and ran toward the enclosure, shouting for the crowd to move back. He grabbed a hose from the maintenance shed and sprayed into the pit, the high-press stream breaking the chimp's focus for seconds at a time. Bo let go, slapped the ground, and charged forward again, stopping inches from the water spray. The younger male backed away, pacing in circles while pant-hooting. For nearly half a minute, the 2 chimps alternated between lunging and retreating, as keepers threw fruit and banged metal poles against the barrier to draw them off. Eventually, Beau released his grip on the torn fabric of Matthew's shirt and retreated. There are moments when I reflect on the wildness that lives just beneath the surface of what we call domestic. The story of Belinda Holmes and her chimpanzee Charlie is one of those moments. It serves as a stark reminder that no amount of familiarity can truly erase the primal instincts that lie dormant within even the most seemingly docile creatures. I often wonder what Belinda must have been thinking in those final moments. It was June 11th, 2014, in Stamford, Connecticut. The afternoon was quiet, marked only by the sounds of lawnmowers and passing cars. Houses lined Rockledge Drive in neat rows, each with trimmed lawns and small front porches. Inside one of these homes, a woman was about to face an attack that would shock the entire community. The house looked ordinary from the outside, but what lived inside made it different from every other home on the block. Belinda Holmes was 57 years old and had lived in Stamford most of her life. She worked part-time at an insurance office, but was better known to neighbours for keeping an unusual companion, a male chimpanzee named Charlie. Belinda had gotten Charlie as an infant years earlier, ignoring state laws that banned private ownership of such animals. She raised him like a child, dressing him in clothes, feeding him at the table, and driving him around in her car. Friends said she was devoted to him, and believed she could control him the way others controlled pets. For years, Charlie was a local spectacle. Children stared when he looked out the windows. Neighbours watched Belinda walk him on a leash through the yard. She treated him like family and defended him whenever anyone expressed concern. But there were warning signs. Charlie had grown much larger over the years. By age 12, he weighed over 120 lbs. Belinda struggled to hold him back when he became upset, but she insisted he was gentle and misunderstood. The house showed years of living with the animal. Furniture was scratched and damaged from his climbing. The air often smelled of animal musk. Charlie moved freely through the rooms, from the kitchen to the living room to the small backyard. On this June day, the weather was warm and the windows were open. Charlie grew restless, pacing and making noise as Belinda tried to calm him with fruit and snacks. Years of living in a human household had not removed Charlie's natural instincts. When stressed or frustrated, a chimpanzee's aggression can surface suddenly, with violence that no amount of familiarity can prevent. There had been warnings before. Months earlier, a neighbour called animal control after Charlie escaped into the yard. He chased cars and pounded on a vehicle before Belinda brought him back inside. State officials reminded her that owning him was illegal, but she ignored the fines. Friends noticed that Charlie became irritable around strangers, but Belinda continued to insist he was harmless. On the afternoon of June 11th, his agitation was clear. He banged on the table, knocked over a chair, and showed his teeth. Belinda moved closer to grab his arm. The attack started in seconds. Charlie lunged forward and slammed Belinda backward into the couch. His hands gripped her shoulders, and his teeth sank into her face with terrible force. Neighbours heard the noise through the open windows. Furniture crashed, and Belinda screamed. Charlie bit again, tearing into her hands as she tried to protect herself. Blood pooled quickly across the carpet as he continued the assault with relentless strength. Belinda tried to crawl away, but Charlie dragged her back by her clothes. He hit her with his fists, then bit into her forearm and broke the bone. Her screams brought neighbours running to the house. One man tried the door, but stopped when he looked through the window. Charlie was hunched over Belinda, his face and arms covered in blood. The neighbours backed away and called 911, their voices shaking as they described what was happening. Police arrived within minutes. Officers walking toward the front door heard the chimp screeching and Belinda crying. Through the glass, they saw Charlie attacking, tearing at her scalp and face. There were no cages, no barriers, no way to separate the animal from the victim. When Charlie turned toward the window and pounded against it with bloodied hands, officers decided they had to act. Officers fired multiple shots, the sound echoing through the quiet street. Charlie collapsed in the living room on the blood-stained carpet. Officers rushed inside and pulled Belinda out from under his body. She was barely awake, her face destroyed, and her hands mangled. Paramedics worked quickly, but the damage was severe. She was airlifted to a trauma centre with critical facial injuries, severe trauma to both hands requiring amputation, and massive blood loss. Afterward, investigators documented the scene. Furniture was flipped over, walls were splattered with blood, and Charlie lay where he had fallen. Belinda's phone was found on the kitchen counter, smeared with blood. The last call she tried to make to 911 was never completed. Neighbours gathered outside. Before this tragedy, a similar incident occurred at an animal park. Matthew, a staff member, was severely injured when a chimpanzee escaped its enclosure. He was found with lacerations, puncture wounds, and facial injuries. Despite paramedics' efforts, he died from blood loss and trauma. The investigation revealed that the enclosure didn't meet safety standards, and that the park lacked a formal emergency response team. Several students who witnessed the incident reported nightmares and panic. The chimp exhibit was temporarily closed, with promises of stronger barriers and clearer supervision protocols. The screams would stay with them forever, they said. Those who witnessed what happened to Belinda, the woman attacked by a chimpanzee, were shaken to their core. Belinda survived, but her life was irrevocably altered, marked by multiple surgeries, disfigurement, and the need for constant care. The case ignited national outrage, spotlighting the inherent dangers of keeping exotic animals as pets. Lawmakers in Connecticut responded by enacting stricter regulations, including a complete ban on private chimpanzee ownership. Even the house where it happened was eventually sold, though the new owners were fully aware of its dark history. I recall reading about another incident, one that occurred on May 28, 2017. It was Memorial Day weekend near Austin, Texas, along a bend of the Colorado River. Several families had gathered for a barbecue at a privately rented picnic site, a seemingly idyllic spot of grass shaded by live oaks bordering the open water. Cars lined the dirt access road, and children played near the grills while the adults unpacked food and folding chairs. The afternoon heat caused the river to shimmer as it flowed past the tables. But one of the guests had brought an animal that most people only ever see behind glass. The victim was a 36-year-old high school track coach named Daniel Ortiz, who lived nearby. He was known for his steadiness, the kind of person who always brought extra water and sunscreen. That day, he'd finished a 5-mile run and stopped by the gathering after a friend texted him about the barbecue. He noticed the small crowd near the tables and walked over, curious. Daniel, I learned, had always felt comfortable around animals. He volunteered at a local shelter, helping calm anxious dogs before adoption events. He kept a respectful distance from the animal, staying behind a low trash can. The chimpanzee wore a harness, and its owner chatted with onlookers, offering small pieces of fruit. Daniel simply wanted a clear photo to show his students, proof of the strange thing he'd seen on a normal Sunday. He moved forward a few feet, holding his phone out, trying to get a clean shot past the small crowd. The scene was, in every other way, perfectly ordinary. The chimp shifted constantly, pacing in a small circle on the leash, sniffing the air, reaching for anything held too close. A faint musk drifted downwind, mingling with the charcoal smoke from nearby grills. It's important to remember that adult male chimpanzees are not suited for public gatherings. In their social groups, dominance is enforced with sudden violence. Years of human handling can't erase those instincts. Crowds, unfamiliar faces, and the competition for food can bring those instincts to the surface in seconds. A city ordinance banned exotic animals within Austin limits, but this picnic site lay just beyond municipal oversight. Few people at the event realized that the handler lacked the proper permits. A couple near the front stepped back when the chimp bared its teeth at a toddler holding a bright red cup. The owner shortened the leash but continued to offer it bits of fruit. A runner passing by along the dirt road called out that it looked risky. Daniel nodded, adjusted his stance, and waited for the chimp to settle so he could take one steady shot. The tension grew. Children clustered too close, then were pulled back. The chimp snatched a strawberry from a paper plate and grunted, its eyes fixed on the moving hands and faces. The owner tugged the leash, which had slackened around his wrist. Daniel stepped a little closer, maybe 2 feet forward, to avoid another person's shoulder in his frame. The chimp wheeled toward the movement. For a beat, everything held still except the wind. The lunge covered the gap in a blur of dark arms and bared teeth. The harness yanked tight, but not before the chimp's hand closed on Daniel's wrist. The phone flew from his grip, skidding across the dirt. The first bite hit his forearm just below the elbow, tearing skin and muscle. Daniel stumbled backward onto the edge of a blanket, trying to pull free. The chimp's grip did not loosen. A second bite tore into the back of his hand. Screams rose from the crowd. The chimp dragged Daniel down, its weight pinning him on his side. Daniel tried to roll and get his feet under him, but the chimp climbed up his torso and hammered his shoulder with its fists. The leash tangled with the owner's legs, causing him to fall. In the scramble, the leash slackened again. The chimp shifted higher, seized Daniel's head with both hands, and bit into his cheek. Blood pooled in the grass, soaking the corner of a blanket and streaking the chimp's face. Attempts to intervene failed in rapid succession. A man kicked at the chimp's hip, but the chimp swung one arm without looking and knocked him off balance. Another tried to shove the animal with a folding chair. The chimp ducked and landed another bite on Daniel's face. The sounds were distinct and awful. Wet impacts of fists, ragged breathing, high-pitched shrieks from the animal, and short grunts from Daniel every time teeth met bone. A woman dragged two children backward by their shirts as the owner crawled toward the leash, hands shaking. The attack slowed when the owner managed to loop the leash under the chimp's chest and pull it toward a picnic table leg, creating a brief barrier. The chimp released, then lunged again, tearing at Daniel's face and arms before finally losing strength. Daniel's movements weakened. He tried to lift an arm, but another bite to the wrist broke a bone with a sharp crack. Bystanders threw bottles and tried to shield him with a trash can lid, but nothing worked. Emergency calls went out within seconds, yet the rural location delayed help. By the time deputies arrived, the shouting had stopped. The chimp sat trembling near the overturned table, the leash twisted tight around its torso. Daniel lay a few feet away, motionless on the trampled grass. The chimp was sedated and lifted into a transport cage. By dusk, only tire tracks and a few torn paper plates remained. The river kept moving, slow and steady, carrying away the sounds that I've always been haunted by the story of what happened on September 14, 2018, in Los Angeles. The morning sun, the small studio tucked between warehouses, the crew setting up a seemingly simple animal demonstration. It all sounds so ordinary. But that day, the ordinary shattered. A chimpanzee, brought in for a daytime talk show segment, unleashed chaos that would forever alter the lives of everyone involved. Kevin Harris, a 41-year-old exotic animal trainer, had built his career on patience, teaching wild animals to tolerate our human world. This particular job was just another opportunity to earn a paycheck and promote his business. The chimp, Mike, was 13 years old and had worked with Kevin since he was a baby. Kevin often said Mike understood the rhythm of production, but the truth is, adulthood changes everything, especially for male chimps. The set was simple: a sofa, a coffee table, a painted backdrop. Mike sat on a stool beside Kevin, constantly shifting, tugging at his leash, and scanning the unfamiliar faces. Before the cameras even started rolling, the animal safety coordinator suggested delaying the segment, noting Mike's stress behaviors, pacing, baring teeth, tugging sharply. But the director, pressed by the tight schedule and shifting sunlight, insisted they proceed. Kevin re-asked everyone, offering Mike small pieces of banana, and, for a moment, the tension seemed to fade. As recording began, the room brightened under the hot studio lamps. The host smiled, reading her lines. Kevin guided Mike closer, cueing him to wave. For a few seconds, everything worked. Then, the boom microphone dipped, casting a shadow across Mike's face. His posture changed instantly. A low pant hoot echoed off the walls. Kevin turned, reaching out to calm him, but that brief touch broke the balance. The chimp lunged. The leash snapped. Kevin fell backward. Mike's hands came down in rapid strikes, fists hammering Kevin's chest. The room erupted in noise, shouts, hoots, the crash of equipment. Kevin tried to shield his face, but Mike's jaws locked onto his arm, tearing through muscle and tendons. Blood sprayed across the carpet. The host ran off set. Crew members screamed for security. Someone swung a tripod, but Mike dodged, gripping Kevin's shirt and dragging him toward the wall. The impact cracked one of the camera housings. The chimp's shrieks grew higher, rhythmic and mechanical, each sound matched to a strike or bite. Kevin's movement slowed. A second crew member threw a fire extinguisher. The spray clouded the air. Mike released for a moment, then turned toward the noise, baring teeth streaked with red. Security burst in, blasting Mike with the extinguisher. He staggered, then collapsed beside the toppled couch. Kevin survived, but barely. Surgeons documented dozens of puncture wounds, a shattered forearm, and severe facial injuries. He lost part of his arm and most of the muscle tissue on one side of his face. The production shut down indefinitely. The footage was never aired. In the aftermath, investigators cited lapses in protocol and disregard for the safety consultant's warning. For Kevin, the lesson came at an unbearable cost, one he would spend the rest of his life recovering from. The story shifts now to October 9th, 2019, along the Kampala-Fortale Highway in western Uganda. This two-lane road curved through steep forested hillsides. Martin Blake, a 48-year-old American wildlife photographer, was traveling alone. He had spent 2 weeks documenting primates in East Africa, seeking one last series of images before flying home. He was known for chasing difficult shots, often leaving marked trails to capture animals in unusual settings. That morning, he drove west out of Fortale, stopping where the highway cut through the forest. He had heard stories of chimpanzees. I've always been drawn to stories where the line between observer and participant blurs, sometimes with tragic consequences. There was a photographer named Martin, driven by the pursuit of unique images, who ventured into a place where chimpanzees were known to appear near a mountain road. He hoped to capture one against that dramatic backdrop. What he captured instead were its teeth. Martin had experience photographing gorillas and monkeys, but his ambition sometimes led him close to danger. He parked near a bend in the road and began walking along the shoulder, camera in hand. A local motorbike rider shouted a warning, gesturing towards the trees, but Martin, perhaps too focused on his goal, waved back and continued. He seemed more concerned about the speeding trucks than the animals. The highway wound through green ridges, the vegetation pressing close. Traffic came in bursts, followed by long stretches of a forest silence. Red dirt slopes rose sharply on one side, while trees leaned over a drop into dense undergrowth on the other. It was along these edges that chimpanzees sometimes appeared, easily navigating the embankments and ditches. Their shrinking habitat had made the edge of the asphalt another boundary to patrol, and, when startled, their first response was often aggression. Rangers often warned tourists to stay in their vehicles. Truck drivers had reported seeing chimps near bends where fruit trees grew close to the road. Locals avoided walking alone there, especially in the mornings when the animals were most active. Martin had heard these warnings at his lodge the night before, but he dismissed them, reasoning that he had worked safely around gorillas in even stricter conditions. A few minutes into his walk, he saw movement above him. A large male chimpanzee emerged from the vines, pausing at the edge of the slope. 2 smaller chimps lingered behind him. Martin raised his camera, crouching low for a clear shot. A truck roared past, startling the animals. The younger chimps retreated, but the male stood his ground, hooting sharply. Martin kept clicking, zooming in. Unaware, he stepped forward into the lane as the chimp began to descend. It took only seconds. The chimp dropped onto the asphalt with a heavy thud, closing the distance on all fours. Martin lowered his camera just as the animal charged, dark arms swinging. The impact knocked him backward into the gravel, his camera skidding away. The chimp seized his left arm, dragging him toward the edge of the road. Martin tried to brace himself, but the strength difference was overwhelming. The first bite tore into his forearm, ripping skin and muscle. A passing motorbike braked, the rider shouting in horror. Martin screamed and kicked, but the chimp straddled his chest and struck his head with its fists. Another bite tore into his shoulder. Blood pooled on the gravel, running into the ditch. The younger chimps reappeared briefly, hooting and circling before retreating again. The male remained fixed on Martin, pulling at his clothes and biting again, this time at his ear and jaw. Witnesses tried to intervene. The motorbike rider threw stones, but the chimp barely flinched. A truck slowed, its horn blaring, startling the animal just long enough for Martin to roll onto his side. The chimp dragged him back and sank its teeth into his thigh, shaking violently. The sounds were raw. Martin's strained breathing, the chimp's screeches, the crunch of gravel. The assault lasted only a few minutes, but it felt far longer before another vehicle stopped and locals rushed forward, shouting and waving sticks. The chimp released him and retreated toward the slope, disappearing into the vines with blood on its face and hands. Martin lay motionless on the roadside, his clothes torn and soaked. Drivers flagged down a passing truck, and he was lifted onto the flatbed using a blanket. With no ambulance nearby, locals tried to keep Prez on his wounds. As the truck sped toward Fortal, he lost consciousness within minutes. By the time they reached the outskirts of town, he had no pulse. Doctors at the hospital confirmed he was dead on arrival. His camera bag held memory cards with his last images: the forest edge, the red dirt slope, and one blurred frame of the chimp stepping from the vines.